I think I bought my car in '96. I knew nothing. There was no internet lists. I started doing everything for myself. I live in northern Vermont, and I'm not near any population at all. So basically, when I bought the car, was sort of the theme that I started with was it's never going to the shop. I'm going to build a shop that's capable of working on these kinds of things. I'm also interested in aviation. I was planning on building a shop so I could play around with airplanes as well. And what's 96, like 5 years later, I've basically taken the whole car apart and put it back together, and anything that you can do in a shop, I figured out how to do in my home shop, alignments, anything. And this thing is kind of the same story. When I bought the car, 78, 79 is very different, has different fuel injection, it has some different brakes. They're just different than the rest of the model years. There's a lot of things that are different. At that time, I started looking into the manual sets, and I said, this is 9-volume manual set that's available. I said, geez, I only got a 79 car. I can't need 9 volumes of manuals, you know? So I found this old literature dealer. The guy's name is Shifts. He's on the internet, and I said, have you got a manual set, a shop manual set for a 920? He says, yeah, I got this old, like, 4-volume set. It's like the original 78 manual set. So I bought that manual set. It's like $175 or something like that. And in that manual set, the 9201 tool didn't exist yet, and they had a picture of this tool that Porsche used to carry. And it was this simple thing, looked just like this, a little bit different, wasn't stainless, but it was, you know, basically the same thing. I said, that's great, that's a simple tool. I'll buy one of those. And I called a couple people, and it was discontinued, and that's how I found out about the 9201 tool and how much it cost. And after I hit the floor and got back up, you know, how much this thing costs, I said, geez, I work at this place that does sheet metal, and I've got an engineering background. I ought to be able to make one of those if it doesn't exist. And I came to my first frenzy like probably a lot of you guys are doing, and I got talking to people, and I met this guy by the name of Mark Anderson who runs 928 International, and we got talking about the timing belt tool, and he said, geez, I got one of those old tools sitting on the shelf. So one thing led to another, and by the time I got back from the frenzy, the FedEx packages showed up at my house, and I was taking calibration measurements off the old tool, and, you know, one thing led to another, and I made, you know, originally 5 sets of parts. And so this thing basically is what was designed for the car when it was brand new. It's a copy of the original. So that's why I had a lot of confidence, sort of like, wow, that's a tool that was designed for my car at the time, you know what I mean? So that's how this thing came about, a little history. What do we need to know about? I've got a set of instructions that comes with this thing, and basically it's experience-based. It sort of doesn't follow the manuals, but it's what everybody really does when they mess around with cars. Got a guy by the name of J.P. Rodkey, who's also an early 928 guy, but he wrenches for a bunch of people, and he was working on an S4 at the time. The S4 that's in the instructions was JP, and he helped me go through the instructions and found a really good way to work through the thing, you know, with normal tools in a normal amount of time, and that's where those came from. The 16-valve instructions are my car, the pictures are my car, I got this really simple way of doing it. The manuals talk about all kinds of things that you do, and the manuals are sort of written for the factory-trained mechanics, so they leave out some important stuff, and they put some other stuff in that really isn't necessary. So the instructions are sort of a grassroots kind of version that's really made for the home mechanic. And we're going to run through the procedure. Basically, this timing belt in this car is about 7 feet long, and at the time that it was introduced, it was the longest toothed rubber belt that had ever been put in an automotive application, ever. And it's still pretty much, you know, if not it's one of the longest toothed belts that's ever been. This motor is aluminum, and it grows a lot. And so it's got this tensioner assembly, and people hear the word tensioner, and when they hear the word tensioner, they think this is a device that, you know, you tighten the belt and you keep it tight with. Actually, what it is it's sort of a temperature sensing device that allows the belt tension to stay constant as the engine grows and shrinks and grows and shrinks. And it also has a little bit of a spring function in it, so that when you're changing RPMs, the belt will start flapping because it's got pretty long lengths in it. And the other thing that the tensioner does is it helps to take out some of that flapping. Wally, help me out.
You want me to bring you a tensioner that's taken apart so you can...
Have you got one? Oh, yeah, sure, man. Absolutely. So this tensioner is a little piece of cast metal, and it's got a push rod and a little piston and some oil in it. And the oil is in there so that the engine can heat it up, and it'll communicate with the engine heat, so that tensioning device knows what's going on with the engine. It's growing and shrinking and reacting the engine temperature. It's got some bimetallic springs in them. They look like little flat cones. It's got a whole bunch of them. They're called Belleville washers, basically. And what they do is they kind of, as a pack, they kind of shrink and grow in length. And they respond to both heat and input from the belt. Like if it's flapping, it'll dampen that and kind of keep the belt from flapping a lot. And those are pretty much it. You know, the belt has got teeth, so what you're trying to do with a tool like this, basically the result you're looking for is you don't want it too tight and you don't want it so loose that it's going to jump teeth. If it's too tight, it's going to groove down into the cam sprockets. We'll take a look at those in a minute. Because they're soft and there's some abrasives loaded into the, for strength reasons, into the rubber. They always load rubber with stuff to change its, like its hardness. And if you tighten it too much, it acts like a piece of sandpaper and starts grooving into things. It also starts chewing up bearings and stuff. Like an old water pump, if you tension properly, an old water pump, you'll probably chew it up. You know, so what I recommend, and I think everybody recommends, even people that sell water pumps, they're not trying to sell you a water pump when they recommend change your water pump. It's because they're old and they're weak, and if they've been running at a low tension setting and you bring them up proper and you've changed some other stuff, you're probably going to shoot the seal and the bearing in the front of the water pump. So the other thing with the water pump to mention is if you don't do your own work, like somebody like me, my labor's free to me. It's just I'm playing with the car. It's, you know, if you're paying somebody else and they spend all the time to go in and access this stuff and replace it, and you put an old water pump back on, there's a good chance you're going to pay for that labor again soon. So, you know, if you got your own car and you like to play around, Wally and I talked about this when I was doing my water pump. He said, "Ah, yeah, put it back in. It looks good," you know. And mine blew in about 2,000 miles. So, you know, if somebody like me, I can take a chance like that. It's no big deal. I'm just driving around the neighborhood anyway. I wasn't on a long trip. Cool. That's great. Oh, did you bring the electrical circuit too?
Yeah.
Wow, this one's busted.
Yeah.
Badly.
That's why I'm
So this thing, this is actually one of the ones that has the oil bleed in it. You see these little oil fittings? That's for topping the oil up, or changing the oil. This gizmo on the back, it's going to be hard to see down in. This is great that we got this out of the car. Thank you, Wally. There's even some blue stuff here, the seal, keep it from dripping. So there's a lock nut on this shaft, and there's an adjuster. The lock nut holds this thing in position once you've made the adjustment. When you screw this thing in like tightening a screw, that's tightening the belt. When you back it out, that's loosening the belt. What it's doing is pushing this push rod up and back. That push rod pushes into a lever arm that's on a pivot. On the end of that lever arm is a big roller. There you go.
Pivot here, roller
The roller goes here in a big bearing. That roller is what's pushing against the belt. So it's working off this pivot. You're tightening it. You're pushing that roller up into the belt. The belt kind of runs over. It heads off to the passenger side. Let's say right side cam. For those people in the UK, right may not be the passenger side, depending on what country you're in. But it's when you're looking out the windshield. So it comes off the crankshaft down low. Some cars have another little bearing. It goes right.
Other little bearings down here.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think is the water pump, the oil pump are on the back side, coming back. So it really goes to this roller and then it goes right to the cam, up over the cam. Back down through, under the water pump, over the other one, around the oil pump, and back to the crank. I hope I got that right. If I didn't get it right, don't quote me. But, so that's most of the system.
Okay.
Yep.
Quick question.
Yep. Start the car and look at it and see if the thing's flapping or doing or running back and forth, you know, under different loads and stuff like that. You can't do that in the later cars because the distributor's bolted right to the middle of the thing, and it's bolted to the cover, so you can't like take the cover off and then put the distributor back on. So,
Jay, could I take a minute to explain the electrical thing?
please do.
Okay, this would be a good time to interrupt Jay and do the electrical thing for the later cars, okay? You have a belt tension warning light. This is the switch for the belt tension warning light. All right, you've got the push rod here that is pushed out by the spring, by the bolt, and by the bevel washers that make a very short, very stiff, temperature-sensitive spring and sensing element. This is not the right spring. This is one out of my junk box because I've lost the right spring out of this, but it illustrates the point. The push rod here pushes this little push rod, and you will notice on the outside of that there's a nylon sleeve. All right, the spring goes in